Ladies and gentlemen, sports fans alike, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. One of the couple, two, three best podcasts around. So sit back, grab yourself a cold one and a Polish sausage, park your keister in the French room, and listen to Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
In Chicago, you know that all sports rock. The Bears, Hawks, Bulls, Cubs and Sox. Pick your favorite, you can choose. As long as the Packers lose. For everything you need to know, it's Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski Sports Talk Chicago. This is your host Sean. On today's episode we have Garrett Cole saying the Cubs aren't the best team in baseball, White Sox having a rough time with the New York Yankees, and we have guest Michael Whitlow from Bulls Beat Blog. All of this and more on this episode of Bill Swerski Sports Talk Chicago. First, we'd like to thank our sponsor, the Rockford Ice Hogs. If you're not familiar with the Rockford Ice Hogs, they're the AHL minor league affiliate of the Chicago Blackhawks. What does that mean for you? You get to see the stars of tomorrow today at family-friendly prices. You can take your whole family out and not break the bank. Where are they located? Only 90 minutes from the city limits in Rockford, Illinois at beautiful BMO Harris Bank Center. Season has ended for this year and we want to thank them for a great season making it to the Calder Cup playoffs. But don't fret. Season starts again in October. You can get your season tickets now at icehogs.com. So I don't want to talk too much about baseball. This is we have a great guest for you. I want to focus more on that, but I do want to talk a little bit. Since first I want to say I need to shut my stupid big mouth. Number one, this is the moment we're gonna take that I'm just gonna. Where this is going to be the huge big difference between this show and the stuff you listen to on ESPN Radio and 670 The Score is I'm going to tell you where I said things that were dumb and I'm going to point them out because we're all have flaws. Nobody's perfect. And I made the mistake of jinxing the Cubs, number one, by saying that, talking about how great they were and how this team can roll. And they go ahead and lose a series to a powder puff team like the San Diego Padres. And don't get me wrong, the Padres have some nice players, but they should not be beating the Cubs, and they should not be beating them the way they did. They scored a lot of runs. They got to them. They did things that no other team other than the Rockies have done to the Cubs. And so that is my mistake, and I'm not going to say that this week. So I'll take full blame for that in the sports, superstition world. The other thing I said was, is that I expected Anthony Jefferson to compete for one of the starting safety spots, and he got cut already. So clearly, the things that I was told by people at Hallis Hall during last training camp that they really liked him, and some of the buzz that I've heard talking about him prior to his injury were either exaggerated or they really do like the new safeties that they've brought in. Either way, they've cut Anthony Jefferson. He is not going to be in the mix. So there is going to be, this year at safety, unless they bring in a veteran, in the next couple of months, we're going to be looking at two really young safeties on this team. So that's where we're at. So yeah, I was wrong on that, and that was me going by some information I was provided at training camp last year, and there's a few things that I heard around since then, and it turned out to be not true. So there you go. But anyway, the Cubs had, since the last time we recorded, they lost 2 or 3 to the Padres, and it was a little bit of a rough way to lose it, by games that they thought they had wrapped up and giving up runs late to just not being able to hit their pitchers per se, and it was a rough time against the Padres, and I just don't know how to put it into words. I think everybody was kind of in shock by it, and I was really worried that it was going to take its toll on on the Cubs players to be, their confidence, because they should have, walked all over the San Diego Padres, but especially at home. But those things happen, and this is a long season. And I'm not one of those people that the sky is falling, but it was just a little bit shocking. And then the way this pace that the Cubs have been on with the 800 winning percentage, that's historic. That's better than 1927 Yankees type thing. This is better than just every team ever. And even with this loss, the Cubs have the best start in baseball since the '84 Tigers. So this is a long season. Major League Baseball season is 162 games. 162 games. The Cubs are 38 games in. They're like 20% of the way. They're not even a quarter of the way through the season yet. So there's a long way to go. They're going to go on a losing streak at some point. There's going to be stretches where they are only playing 500 baseball, maybe even worse. This is what happens. As long as the pitching staff stays intact, you have to like their chances of not winning or losing 3 games in a row, 4 games in a row. But this is baseball, and those types of streaks happen. And looking at the Cubs' schedule is, you sort of thought that there was a possibility that they were going to have. They were going to go on a little bit of a skid because after the Padres, because they had 3 games against Pittsburgh, who's the second place team in the division, and then a trap series against the Brewers coming up in Milwaukee. Then, without any days off, they go 3 in Milwaukee, then 3 in San Francisco, and then 3 in St. Louis. 9 games in a row, no games, and that goes Midwest, West Coast, back to Midwest, before having 1 day off and then playing the Phillies at home. So it's going to be a tough stretch, and I was worried with coming off of that loss to the Padres, that loss of a series, and you go on to play Pittsburgh, that would be a situation where you could go on a losing streak. And the Cubs go in there and play extremely well against Pittsburgh again and win 2 out of 3 with, probably should have won game 3 as well, but Garrett Cole came out and played on fire. But after the game, you have, Big Mouth Garrett Cole. He's talking about how that the Cubs are not the best team in baseball. It's really hard to understand where he's coming from. Garrett Cole's faced the Cubs twice this season, and sure, he had a great game today, but he got roughed up the first game and got chased out of the game super early. And if you look, Cubs have, if you put every team in baseball in the same division, the Cubs have 4.5 game lead on the second best team or the second best record in baseball, and that's the Orioles. If you look at statistics, the Cubs have the best on-base percentage out of any team in baseball, and they're 3rd best in OPS. They've scored the 2nd most number of runs. They have the 2nd most number of RBIs. If you look at run differential, the Cubs have a bigger run differential than the 2nd and 3rd teams in run differential combined. If you want to look at pitching stats, you look at team ERA, is the Cubs by far and away have the best team ERA out of anybody. They've got a 2.66 team ERA. Next best team is Washington at 2.97. They're the only 2 teams under 3. If you want to look at fielding stats, sure, they had a rough week with, we talked about last week ad nauseum about how good Javi Baez is a defender, and then he has a couple of costly errors this week, and those are more him just being nonchalant. It's not about his talent. He's a little too cocky. But if you look at fielding percent, is even then the Cubs are, one of the better teams in baseball as far as fielding percentage. So it's I don't know what way Garrett Cole can say that the Cubs aren't the best team in baseball. If they're not, who is? And it's even funnier that he says that is because this is a team that these two have played each other 6 times so far this early season, and the Cubs are 5-1 against the Pirates, and they've outscored them 38-13 in the 6 head-to-head games. And the first time Garrett Cole faced him, he didn't make it out of the 4th inning. Didn't even make it out of the 4th inning and gave up six runs on 6 hits and 4 walks to the Cubs. So Garrett Cole, I mean, you just sound like a bitter old man that you're not that old. This is a really good team. And sure, they've had a rough week this week, and they've got a really rough stretch coming up with the Giants and St. Louis, and then Philly coming to town. This is still a really good team. But this last week has been a week where they've really missed Kyle Schwarber's bat, I think. Is he Babe Ruth? Of course not. But he's a guy who has absolute game-changing power, and that's teams just can't pitch to him. And he's got a really good eye, so he doesn't strike out. I mean, he does strike out a lot, but he's also got a very good eye and draws a lot of walks. He's got a high on-base percentage. But these close games where the Cubs are not hitting as a team, some of the batters, including Jay Hay, are still have rough batting averages. A guy like Kyle Schwarber coming in with the power he does, they could really change a game. Like today, you had just an absolutely phenomenal game by John Lester in pitching. He had a no-hitter going into, I think, the 7th or 6th or 7th, and ended up being a 2-1 ball game. I mean, one swing of the bat and Kyle Schwarber could have changed things around. Maybe he doesn't, but you never know. So it's this last week has been a week where you've really missed a Kyle Schwarber and really could have used his bat in the lineup. Arrieta came in, had another fantastic game. He just looks good. It just keeps rolling, and the guy got better when he had Miguel Montero back on catching for him. So the guy didn't even have his best stuff either. So if you look at Arrieta's stuff against Pittsburgh the other night, it just it wasn't his best stuff. He had a little bit of command issues with some of his pitches, but he still was only gave up 2 runs and on 3 hits, and I think 2 walks. So it's a pretty phenomenal run this guy's been on. One more thing I guess I want to talk about with the Cubs is, because I want to keep this a little bit brief because we have a guest, is the Cubs have I guess it's probably a really good problem, but it's something they're going to have to deal with sooner rather than later. Is you have Wilson Contreras, who's been tearing it up in AAA. I mean, if you look at Wilson Contreras, he's batting .339 with a .436 on base percentage and a .945 OPS. I mean, this is a catcher. As a catcher, and he's got 3 home runs already and 18 RBIs. So he's just whacking the ball. And does that necessarily mean it's going to translate well into the majors? Not necessarily, because Ryan Kalish it has a .368 batting average in Iowa, but still, he's definitely a force with his bat, and you have to make a decision sooner rather than later. Is if you have another catching issue, do you bring up Wilson Contreras? At what point is he just spinning his wheels in Iowa? Do you bring him up? Is Miguel Montero going to be on the team next year? I mean, you're going to have. Do you want to lock up? Do you want to bring up your young stud catcher and have him be just either a positional, or a spot start guy, or are you going to have Miguel Montero making a boatload of money to be a backup? You're not going to have David Ross, so there's decisions that have to be made here. But it's a good problem to have, and you've got some really good talent down there in Iowa. Dan Vogelbach is a nice one to keep an eye on. He's batting .330 right now with a .977 OPS, and he's already got 6 home runs and 29 RBIs. And the reason you got to keep an eye on him is he plays first base. He doesn't really play any other position, and you've got a pretty good young first baseman locked up already. So Dan Vogelbach is a guy that you could use as a trade chip and really not change the dynamic of what you're trying to do with this team, because he's an expendable piece. Also, you have Albert Almora, who's your center fielder, and he's batting .338 with an .857 OPS, and he's got 3 home runs himself and 21 RBIs. The reason that's an interesting one is your center fielder is going to have the opportunity to move on elsewhere sooner rather than later. So maybe it's almost time for Albert Almora to come up starting next year. But these are things to keep an eye on. You still have Mendy Alcantara on the Iowa roster team. He's had a cup of coffee in the majors that you can use him as a trade chip or to bring up. You've got another catcher that's batting really well down there in Taylor Davis. So you've got guys down there in Iowa that you can use as trade chips or to start bringing up later in the season. But we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. We're not even a quarter of the way through the season. I guess that's really all I want to say about the Cubs. And then I just want to talk about the White Sox quickly. And now I want to move on. We break up baseball a little bit with a little bit of Bulls talk. We haven't talked Bulls in a while just because of the end of the season and whatnot. But we have a guest on today, and we'd like to welcome Michael Whitlow, editor of Bulls Beat blog. All right, so everybody, welcome to the show, Michael Whitlow. If you are not familiar with Michael Whitlow, you can follow him on Twitter at MAWhitlow, and he is the editor of Bulls Beat blog. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thanks for having me again. I appreciate it.
It was great having you on last time, so it was natural to have you on again this time, especially after the disappointment that this season was.
Oh, absolutely. I've been asked by numerous people, what you think of this season, and I think the biggest word would be frustration, and then the second biggest would be disappointment, because this team, there was such high expectations, especially after being up, 2-1 against Cleveland in the playoffs last year, and then just to lay the egg they did this year was just very disappointing.
Everybody's talked a lot about reasons for what happened. You could point somewhat to injuries. You can point to Jimmy and Derek not being able to play together. But my biggest question has been, if you think that your team has a championship caliber roster, why do you make that coaching change? Because it does set you back as far as being able to have you're playing together. Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's a good point. They harped on that, especially at the press conference last June when they hired Fred, and they said, this roster can win a championship, yada yada yada. If that was the case, then they wouldn't have lost 3 straight games and would have been eliminated by LeBron James for the 4th time in the last 6 years. It made sense just because Foreman was, Gar Foreman, Bulls GM was so high on Fred, just in the search and stuff, it seemed like all signs were pointing to Fred. But like you said, if this was a championship caliber roster, then a coaching change wasn't needed. I do think that, Tom needed to go. I know it sounds silly, but, it just seemed like the team just didn't mesh. They just seemed like they needed a new voice. But apparently, it's just like, well, okay, we get a new voice, and this team goes backwards. So I don't think it's the coaching. I think it's the personnel that, the coach is assigned to. And obviously, if they're not going to listen to Tom, especially after a good season last year, and they bring in a rookie head coach, why are these players going to listen to a rookie over a guy who's established, who's been on a championship winning team as an assistant, who basically designed that 2008 Boston Celtics defense? It didn't make a lot of sense. And then obviously with their performance, yeah, you can blame injuries, you can blame, all kinds of different things, bad breaks, yada, yada, yada. But it falls on the team. It falls on the personnel.
And I really do agree with you 100% on the fact that Coach Tibbs had to go. It's nothing against his ability to coach, but I think I was never able to pinpoint why I felt that way until recently when Indiana fired their head coach, and Larry Bird emotionally said that coaches have a shelf life with a team. And I think that was it, is Thibodeau had reached the tipping point where there was nothing more he could do for this team, and he was already butting heads with Garpax.
Yeah, it seemed like it really ran its course, especially, Adrian Wojnarowski wrote a piece on how, it's just they didn't even address each other in the hallways. They wouldn't hardly ever speak to each other, referring to Garpax and Tom Thibodeau. It was very, the proper word for it was toxic. And it was. There's no ifs and or buts about it. It was a toxic relationship. Yeah, I agree 100% on shelf life as well. I think Tom's time in Chicago, ran its course, and despite all the success he had, because I had nothing against Tom. I think he's a tremendous coach. But, you just look back to different scenarios. Obviously getting rid of Luol Deng was a big one for Tom because he was, such a versatile player, within the Bulls organization over his time. Supposedly Tom and Ron Adams, who, coaches on the best team in the league, in Golden State, they wanted Draymond Green. Well, obviously they wanted to go a different direction after Derek tore his ACL in the playoffs 4 years ago. They went with Marcus Teague, and we all saw how that panned out, sadly. So I do think there was a lot of tension. I think there was a lot of frustration between the three in terms of Foreman, Paxson, and Thibodeau. And especially after they, basically let Ron Adams go, I think that was really a big thing that kind of got overlooked. But I think it was kind of the downfall and kind of just started the whole avalanche of Tom Thibodeau leaving Chicago.
And at the end of the season, in the middle of the night, when the Cubs and the Sox and the Blackhawks were all playing, Gar Forman and John Paxson had a press conference where they spoke a lot about accountability, and which really seemed disingenuous because the only one that's been held accountable for anything in the past 2 seasons has been Tom Thibodeau. What do you think they mean by accountability, and do you really think that if this coming season doesn't go well, that one or both of those guys will be gone?
It's funny. That press conference was probably the biggest joke of the entire season. You wait till after a meaningless game against the worst team in the league in Philadelphia to have this end-of-the-year presser when obviously, like you said, the Cubs, Sox, and Blackhawks are all playing, and it's just, that was just silly, first off. But, when it comes to these two, it shouldn't really surprise anybody. It's just that I speak for a lot of Bulls fans when I say they're very, very frustrated with those two. The issue remains with Jerry Reinsdorf. He's a very, very loyal guy, which can kind of be his downfall at times. I don't see Gar Forman and John Paxson going anywhere anytime soon. And I know that's not what a lot of fans want to hear, but that's just the sad reality of it, is Reinsdorf's a very loyal guy. Paxton's been there, over a decade. He's very loyal to his staff. And I don't see them going anywhere anytime soon, either one of them. Although I do think a change or two is needed, because obviously, it just seems like we keep going in a circle round and round. It's just like, they put a good team on the floor, they win some big games during the regular season, or in this case, this year, they go out, lose some games they should win, they miss the playoffs. They haven't done that since before they had Derrick Rose. So obviously there's some changes being needed. And it's funny because they talk about that there's major changes coming this summer. Well, major change this summer would be getting rid of one or both of them. But like I said, I don't see that happening. But it would definitely shake things up a little bit.
And speaking of Jimmy Butler, a couple weeks ago, the rumor mill was that Jimmy was on the trading block and the Bulls were going to try to move him and get a package together of draft picks or young players. But now it seems like it's almost done a 180 where Jimmy is they're talking about he's going to represent the Bulls at the draft or at the lottery pick, and talking about who's going to work with him to rebuild this team. Where do you see Jimmy Butler come the start of next season?
I think Jimmy Butler will be a member of the Chicago Bulls 100%. And the reason why is because it's not just because of the $90+ million contract he signed last summer. He is the best player this franchise has to offer. And I know a lot of fans don't want to hear that. They may not like his playing style. They may not like his new attitude. But he's the best piece in this organization, bar none. And it's very frustrating to hear so many frustrated with Jimmy because of just a simple, bad year in terms of communication, chemistry. You can blame Jimmy all you want for the weird and just behind the scenes stuff that took place, calling out Hoiberg after a bad loss in New York, supposedly not happy over Gar Forman's comments about everything being on the table at that presser. Jimmy's a very aggressive guy. He's laid back in terms of, being in front of the camera, but he's an aggressive guy. He wants to win. And you can see that with him day in and day out. I do think he is the guy that's going to lead the Bulls into the future because, as much as we all love Derrick Rose and what he's done for the city of Chicago, it's a very good chance that this coming season is probably going to be his last in Chicago. And, with a lot of money off the books like that, especially, I'm sure we'll get into it with Joakim Noah and Pau Gasol and their money. But I do think Jimmy Butler will remain a Chicago Bull heading into next season.
And we know that it was a weird, it was like the opposite of a dynamic is neither one of them could play well together on the same night. If Derek had a good night, it seemed like Jimmy faded into the sunset and vice versa. Is there any hope that these two can mesh and put together a big year, especially since Rose is going to be playing for that often talked about next max deal?
Yeah, I think that's what it's going to come down to in terms of the Bulls going anywhere next year is can their two best players, can they put it together? And so far what we've seen, at least under Fred Hoiberg, is no. It sucks, You obviously want to see Jimmy and Derek play well together, but they just didn't mesh well together, And obviously, Jimmy missed a month of the year with that bad knee injury after the fall in Denver. Derek had his, fair share and laundry list of, nagging injuries all year. I don't know if it's more of an alpha male thing. It's really tough to gauge. I don't think there's, any animosity towards the other. I think they both want to win, and I think they both like each other. I think they got to figure out how to play within the system, as do the rest of the roster. I think a lot of this year's issues, and obviously go deeper than just injuries. I think it was more of learning two new systems, offensively and defensively. And, especially with Jimmy becoming the star that he is now, I do think that kind of carried over and kind of took away from Derek's game. Now, obviously, Derek's eye injury at the beginning of the year really held him back. He can only see out of one eye. But it's tough. You obviously want them to succeed. But in terms of them working together, until we see it, I don't know if it can be done. I mean, they may have to stagger more minutes in terms of, playing Jimmy with somebody like Justin Holiday or playing Derek more with E'Twaun Moore if the Bulls decide to re-sign him to a new deal. So at least right now, I would say that there's nothing to them playing together, and it just doesn't work. But can it work? Absolutely. I think they're both talented enough to where they can make it work. It's just going to take some time.
So, speaking of re-signing, is the cap is expected to go up in the NBA to roughly $90 million. Looking at the Bulls, what they have, assuming that Paul is going to opt out of his deal, the Bulls have roughly $20 million to spend, which is a lot of money. But if you look at the cap space of every other team in the NBA, they're actually right at the bottom of the league. So do you see the Bulls being able to make any sort of splash?
It's troubling. It really is, because you look at it realistically, the realest case scenario is Joakim Noah, Pau Gasol, and Aaron Brooks are all gone next season. Brooks is an unrestricted free agent. Pau obviously has his player option that he'll probably opt out of, and Joakim Noah is a free agent. Assuming those guys all walk, like you said, the Bulls are going to have roughly $22 million, depending on what they do with each one more. That's not a lot of money, even with the cap going up, $22 million from $70 to $92 million. That's not a lot of money for 4 roster spots. And I know people want to hear, oh, let's go get Dwight Howard. Let's go get Hassan Whiteside. Let's go get Festus Ezeli, who I'm very high on personally. Those would be great names to bring in the middle as a defensive anchor, for example. But there's just not a lot of money. And with the Bulls locked in almost $70 million in terms of, Derek, Jimmy, Taj, there's not a lot of flexibility. There's not a lot of money. But to be fair, this free agent class really isn't that stellar. I think it's more of next year. Because the Bulls really don't have a shot at Durant. Like I said, Hassan Whiteside, he's going to be a max player. Somebody's going to give him max money. I just don't see a lot for the Bulls to do. You can look second, third-tier free agents, maybe try to get Luol Deng back to Chicago and give yourself another athlete on the wing. I doubt he'd want to come back after the whole Spinal Tap incident, but that's realistically what the Bulls are looking at is kind of just, fillers because they just don't have enough money. And it's probably going to have to wait until at least next year for them to really make a splash with Derek and Taj's contracts coming up. Next summer is probably more realistic for them to make a splash. This summer, there's just really not a lot on the table for them.
Yeah, my thoughts are put together a competitive team and then have the money next year to try to entice somebody with that, show that you are competing and you have some money.
Absolutely. It's tough because, the Bulls, they put so much, especially Foreman and Paxson, they put so much emphasis on we got to make the playoffs. We got to make the playoffs. And honestly, I'm in that group this year where missing the playoffs was probably the best thing for the Bulls because at least they can get a lottery. Obviously, their odds aren't great to get a top pick, but they weren't great when they got Derrick Rose. So who knows what happens in terms of the draft lottery next week? Is probably likely they'll pick 13th at best, but it's most likely they're locked into the 14th spot. I look at it as they can't do a lot this summer. They just can't. And it's not that they don't want to, because I'm sure they would like to make some changes. But in terms of flexibility overall, there's just not a lot there. There's just really not.
So if you were general manager of the Bulls, what would be your off-season plan? How would you divvy up that $22 million that they have based on who's available?
Man, that's tough. Well, I would obviously, Pau Gasol wants to walk and go to another contender, if you will. I let him, no problem. Thanks for your service. Best luck in your future endeavors. No question. And I like Pau. I think he's a good guy, good ambassador for the game. But his time in Chicago is pretty much done. In terms of Joakim, if he doesn't want to take a hometown discount, I'm going to let him walk too because Joe, I love you, but you're on the other side of 30, and you've come off a pretty nasty knee surgery that was obviously worse than reported, and you're coming off a shoulder surgery that held you out for a few months this past season. So if you're not willing to work with us to bring in better personnel, then I'm sorry, Joe. Best of luck in your future endeavors as well. If that's the case, then there, obviously the front court is going to be a major need. As for free agency, Aaron Brooks, sayonara, that's knowing you. In terms of bringing guys back, I would love to have each one more back, as I know a lot of other people would. I thought he played very, very well in terms of, when Derek was out with nagging injuries and stuff like that. I thought each one more filled his role very great. Thought he was a good defensive guard. I thought he was really underrated for a lot of the year, and I don't think Bulls fans really understood his impact until later in the year. So, like I said, I would let Brooks, Noah, and Gasol walk. I would try to re-sign more to, $5 million a year, somewhere in that range. just a team-friendly type of deal for, a couple of years, which leaves, realistically, you're looking at 4 roster spots, which that's the tough part, is you only have so much money to go around. And like I mentioned earlier, you're going to have to look at second-tier guys like a Marvin Williams from the Charlotte Hornets, who's more of a 3-and-D type guy, kind of a name that flew under the radar this year, when Charlotte made their run and lost in 7 games to Miami. You got a guy like I said, Lou Aldang. If you could convince Lou, to come back to Chicago, I think that would be very beneficial to the Bulls. Obviously, he knows the organization, he knows the ins and outs. But like I said, with the whole spinal tap incident, and all the injuries that he played through in the past, I don't really know if that's a realistic option. But I guess the big thing would be in terms of clearing out some of what the Bulls have in terms of Noah, Gasol, Brooks, etc., and trying to get younger. It's what I've been preaching for a couple of years when, I'm asked about the Bulls, is getting younger. Because I believe, looking at the numbers from this year's roster, they're like the 7th oldest team in the league, I think, somewhere in that range. But I think the key would be to get younger. That's why I'm a big believer in getting, a project, a very youthful type of kid in the draft lottery, whether it's Vanderbilt's Wade Baldwin, taking a chance on somebody like Deontay Davis from Michigan State, who I liken to a poor man's Anthony Davis, because he is not even just a number in the name, it's just the way he plays. He's very, very, very active defensively. He locks the paint down. I think it's, like I said, the big thing is just getting younger for the Bulls.
So this past season, we saw, after the draft, I think a lot of people were excited about Bobby Portis and what he'd be able to do with the Bulls. And we saw glimpses of it at times, but then we also saw just a kid completely lost on that court. What do you see as what we'll get out of Bobby Portis for next year?
Yeah, I agree 100%. There were times where Bobby looked like a lottery pick. I mean, he looked like a legit NBA player. He's not scared. He plays with good energy, good passion. But especially, in terms of looking lost on the defensive end, Bobby looked about as lost as anybody, out there defensively at times. And that's not what you want to see from a first-round pick that basically fell into your lap. Now, it makes you wonder, why did he fall into the Bulls' lap last year in the early 20s? But I do think there's a lot of talent there for Bobby. I think he can be a very good stretch four, a lot of energy. But the big thing for him is, I would say, getting stronger, because you're gonna play against guys that are, 20, 30, 40 pounds bigger than you, and can move just as quick as you can. So in terms of improving Bobby Portis heading into year 2, I would say it's getting bigger, learning more of the game defensively, because obviously as a rookie, the game's moving 100 miles an hour. You'll do some good things, but you'll do a lot of bad things. So I think a summer's worth of workouts in terms of, learning the game, the NBA game on the defensive end, I think will be very beneficial to him, because he's going to be an intricate part of the Bulls moving forward, because, the Bulls are going to be really limited in the front court, especially if Noah, Gasol, one of the two or both walk. So he's definitely going to be a key piece for the Bulls moving forward. But I would say the big thing for him is focusing on getting the job done defensively.
Yeah, and he's a guy that I really do wish he had a Thibodeau to learn from, because
absolutely,
when Joakim Noah came into this league out of Florida, his first year, sometimes you were just left scratching your head, and you're like, you're full of energy out there, but I don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, and that's exactly Bobby's game. I mean, he likes to shoot perimeter shots. He likes to play with a lot of energy. But in terms of defensively, it's not just his crazy eyes out there. He looks lost. And I agree 100%. I think a young Joe is a very good comparison. Obviously, Bobby's got a better jump shot, but I think that's a pretty good comparison.
And other than Bobby Portis, I've said that I think the chances the Bulls have making the playoffs next year are going to be on Mirotic taking a step forward, and along with Doug McDermott. You have thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. The Bulls, especially when it comes to Fred Hoiberg's offense, two key cogs are going to be Mirotic and McDermott. There's no ifs, and, or buts about it. I know some Bulls fans don't want to hear it. Obviously, both of them are quite atrocious defensively. Nobody's going to deny that. They weren't drafted for their defensive prowess, but they have to make steps forward. They have to make shots. And Mirotic, for him, a big thing is staying healthy. Obviously, he had the 2 procedures. He missed a lot of the season. He lost 15 pounds. It really got him out of his game. He came on strong late. Obviously, it was too little too late for the Bulls. But he came on late and caught fire and made some shots. And, he looked like the guy that the Bulls, picked up, via trade a few years ago in the draft. And obviously, they bought out the rest of his contract with Real Madrid. They brought him over here because they know he can play. And from what we've seen, we know he can play. The problem is him and McDermott, they go ghost for too long of spans. They got to be consistent night in and night out. And that's what it comes to for the both of them is consistency. And if they're not consistent, then there's really no point in putting them on the floor.
I've got 2 more questions for you. First one is Felicio and Holiday. They were 2 people that came in to the Bulls with no expectations and far exceeded those no expectations. Do you think they have a place for the Bulls going forward, or are they flashes in the pan?
That's a good question. I like both of them a lot. I think Cristiano, in the limited action, showed that he can be a very, very good front court player off the Bulls bench. He's got good feet for as big as he is. He's very active on both ends, especially offensively. I thought that game late in the year against Cleveland, he looked really good. And it wasn't even just his statistical output. He looked really good. Obviously he had fresh legs and limited action, but he looked really good. I think he's got a place in the NBA. I really do. As for Justin Holiday, obviously, he's jumped around. He was with Golden State when they won the championship, but he was kind of a more the end of the bench type guy because obviously when you got Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, you don't need a lot of other guard production. So I do think they have a place in the NBA, as with it being with the Bulls. I'm not sure on that in terms of long term, but in the short term, absolutely. I think they both proved at the end of the year, especially those last few weeks, I think they proved they can earn a couple of roster spots, and I think they can be good pieces off the bench for the Bulls that can really contribute next year.
And one last question is, barring any sort of Orlando Magic draft day or lottery ping pong ball luck, and the Bulls don't get the first pick, is who do you think is somebody that they should focus on with the probably the 14th pick?
That's a great question. Obviously, Casey Johnson from the Scottish Tribune made it vocal that they're very interested in Providence's Chris Dunn. As much as I like Chris and I like watching him play, I don't think that's a realistic option for the Bulls. In terms of them picking at 14, I think a guy that's gaining steam, at least in the Chicago area from the Combine this weekend, is Wade Baldwin IV from Vanderbilt. That's definitely a guy you want to look at. He's a 6'3" guard with, I believe, a 6'10" wingspan. Very athletic kid, very young kid. I like him in terms of, in case, Derrick Rose leaves next year, you got Baldwin and Butler together. That could be a pretty good combination of the future. There's another guy that I like personally. I think he's more of a project than anything, and some team may take a chance on him earlier, is Deontay Davis, like I mentioned earlier, from Michigan State. He's very long, very lanky kid, but in terms of, his comparison, I think he does compare to Anthony Davis on the defensive end. Obviously, AD's jump shot is, among the elites. In terms of big men, I think really the only other better shooter at the big man position in the big man positions in the NBA is LaMarcus Aldridge. So the jump shot's not really there for Davis, but in terms of defensive impact, there's not many big men better than I think an underrated guy to look at, and it's a little biased because I am a Kentucky fan at heart. I think Tyler Ulis is a top 15 pick, and I know people are going to look at him. He's 5'9". He's a small kid. He may not fit the system all that well. He may have been a beneficiary of playing in Kentucky, obviously with the 38-1 team 2 years ago. A lot of talent, a lot of NBA talent. But I definitely think he's a guy that should be on the Bulls' radar.
Well, that's all I really had. Is there anything you wanted to add, Michael?
Oh, I just wanted to say thanks for having me on again, Sean. I appreciate it, bud.
And, well, everybody definitely check out Michael on Twitter at MA Whitlow. That's MAWHITLOW. And he is the editor of Bulls Beat blog. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Not a problem, Sean. Thanks for having me again, bud.
And thank you so much, Michael, for being on the show. Always a great guest. Really love talking to him. Make sure you check out Bulls Beat blog. That on Twitter at Bulls Beat blog. Now let's move on. Our last segment is we're going to talk a little bit about the White Sox, and again, not going to talk too much just because of the. We want to make sure we focus on our guest who was kind enough to join the show. But the White Sox had, since the last time we recorded, had a little bit of a rough stretch, just like the Cubs. They had, go down to Texas and lose that series, and then day off, go to New York, lose a series to the Yankees. I mean, sure, they were competitive games. But you saw a little bit of chink in the armor with the second game of that Texas Rangers series, where the Rangers came back and I think they scored 7 runs in the ninth to win that one, 13-11. I was watching that game and I don't know why, but the White Sox had a big lead. You should have felt comfortable because their bullpen has been one of the better bullpens in baseball up to this point. They just got lit up, and you just didn't feel that comfort level going into close this game out. And I don't know why. I just had this sinking feeling that the White Sox weren't going to make it. And as I'm watching, you just kept watching and watching, and they just couldn't get those final outs. And finally, the Rangers came out ahead, 13-11 on that one, and then followed up next game with a 6-5 win. And this is a team that, they dominated, just a couple weeks before. And then they go into New York at Yankee Stadium, and they whitewash the Yankees on Friday with a 7-1 win. But that's Chris Sale pitching, and you'll start to see these more and more parallels with the Cubs pitching staff. Is you have your number one pitcher is an ace that just lights out, hasn't lost yet this season. Chris Sale, I think, is 8-0 right now, and the White Sox gave him 7 runs of support. You really don't need 7 runs when you have Chris Sale on the mound. Same thing with Jake Arrieta. Jake Arrieta is pitching lights out baseball. He's undefeated, and I think he's 6-0 or 7-0. And the Cubs score a lot of runs when he's on the mound. Then you follow it up next game with the Yankees beating the White Sox 2-1, and that was a stellar pitching performance by Quintana. Quintana pitched more than well enough to win that game. The White Sox just don't score runs for him. And the same thing happened today for John Lester. Lester had a no-hitter going into the 7th, and the Cubs lose 2-1. It's just not giving him run support. And then the third pitcher, you have Rodon and John Lackey, who have great stuff. In some games, they go out there and throw a gem. And they have another game where they just get lit up. Inconsistency. And then you have marvelous performances from your 4-starter with Jason Hamill and Matt Latos both pitching really well this season. And then it's always a question mark what you're going to get from that 5th spot. Well, Cubs are much more better shape than White Sox as far as that goes, but a lot of parallels between these two pitching rotations. But you have the White Sox, and they go out and they're not able to get it done today. And they got a decent start with the 5th spot against the Yankees today, but the Yankees, their bullpen again, gave up several runs, gave up 3 runs today, and that's ultimately the difference in this game. The bullpen came in and lights out. The White Sox win this one 5-4 and shut this down. But it's baseball, and these things are bound to happen. And the White Sox, they don't have the consistent run support to be able to back up their pitching well enough to not go on a rough patch like they've gone this week. But right now starts off a huge series for the White Sox because this is a really tough stretch. You've got 7 is it 17 games in 16 days, or is it 18 games in 17 days? Whatever, it's the next number of days. They don't have a day off until June 2nd, just after tomorrow. So White Sox have tomorrow off. Then they don't have another, and that's May 16th. They don't have another day off until June 2nd, and they play every single day except one day they have a doubleheader. And it's not, there's no powder puffs in here. You've got the Astros, who may not have a great record, but you know what they can do. You saw what they can do last year, and they've got two of the best infielders in baseball on their roster. So they're going to be a tough team. You get them at home, but still, it's going to be a tough matchup. You follow that up with 3 against the Astros, then you get 3 against the Royals, then four games in 3 days against the Indians, followed by 3 more against the Royals, and then you get 3 in a row against the Mets. And the Mets are just a no-joke team. They're showing you that their trip to the World Series last year was no fluke. I'm rooting for the White Sox to beat them because that helps the Cubs. This is going to be a really tough stretch. Come first week of June, if the White Sox are still in first place, and then this is especially tough because you have 10 games in a row in this stretch against division opponents. 6 against the Royals, 4 against the Cleveland, and those are your 2 main competitors that are going for this division title. If you look at the baseball, the projections where they do the calculations and probabilities and projections of who's going to make the playoffs, it's still predicting that the Indians are going to win the AL Central ahead of the White Sox, even though the White Sox are several games ahead of the Indians. They're still picking the Indians, and you get 4 games in a row against them. Sure, it's in Chicago, but that's a tough matchup, and you're 5 games up on them, but and 5.5 up against the Royals. But that can change really quickly when you play 10 in a row against your division opponent. So this is going to be a tough matchup, and I'm looking for the White Sox to see what they're going to do. This is going to tell me a ton about what they're made of. Oh, the other day you had your new third baseman Todd Frazier going into the stands to try to make a catch and ended up whacking his face against a piece of metal, cuts his face, gushing blood all over. And then the ultimate, Hawk Harrelson goes, "I'm going down there. You take over the booth." He turned his booth duties over and he went down to the clubhouse or to the field. What are you doing, Hawk Harrelson? You're a weird old man that's not even good at the job you have, let alone going down there and being a medical professional. Like, you're Hawk Harrelson, not Doc Harrelson. Like, just stay up in the booth. That's what you do. And the best part about it, even better than the ridiculousness of him going down there, is when he came back up, he had no information about what was happening. He couldn't have been like, "Yeah, I saw him. He says he's okay. He's just got a cut on his lip. I think he's going to be okay because they're just going to do some stitches and clean it up." He just had no information. He just clueless. Hawk Harrelson is the worst. I'm a diehard Cubs fan. I grew up on the South Side. Always been a Cubs fan. Never liked the White Sox, but as I got older and as I started doing the show, I've learned to really appreciate the White Sox and appreciate having 2 teams in Chicago. So my perspective is biased, but actually I've never really liked Hawk Harrelson. If there are any White Sox fans that listen to this show and you see redeeming qualities of Hawk Harrelson, and don't talk Hawk Harrelson back in the day. We're talking Hawk Harrelson 2016. Are there any redeeming qualities of Hawk Harrelson and why he still has a job and why he's in that booth? Please let me know. The email address is on the website, swerskisports.com. You could tweet them at me at swerskisports or facebook.com/swerskisports. Any of those ways, please let me know what redeeming qualities Hawk Harrelson has. I can't figure them out. But anyway, the White Sox still are playing really good baseball. They're still 5-game lead in their division, and when you really think about it, it doesn't matter if you're the best team in baseball as far as your record goes. As long as you win your division, you're gonna You don't have to play in that wild card game like the Cubs did last year. And the problem with that wild card game is you go in there, you've got to win that game if you plan to go on. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. You have to win that game. So what do? You put your best starter in there. And if you're, at least the Cubs last year had it locked up. They knew they were going to make that wild card, so they could sort of finagle their pitching staff and start sorting that out and setting it up to optimize how they want to do it. But if you're fighting for that wild card spot, you're fighting right up there, and you try to put your best pitcher on there, but that really throws your rotation off come that next series. And the Cubs were able to overcome that against the Cardinals, but you'd much rather start your series and set the pitchers up the way you want to. And as long as you win your division, you don't have to worry about that. And the White Sox have a 5-game cushion. Sure, they lost. They went from being the last time we recorded and had the show last week's episode. They were the best team in the American League record-wise, and now they are tied for second behind Orioles and tied with Boston, who are both just on huge surges. But the White Sox still are a fantastic team. They're going to be right up there. They're going to be in the mix. And I don't think this team is going to go anywhere. But we'll see. Come my birthday, which is June 2nd, come my birthday, we'll see what the White Sox record is after that super long stretch of games. Some really tough games against division opponents. And if they're still in first place, then I have zero doubts that they're gonna go on and make the playoffs. If they make some stumbles in there, which I don't suspect they will, this is just me being cautiously optimistic. I really think that they're a good team. They've got a few flaws on their team, but it's not enough where that pitching staff can't overcome it. So we shall see. But that's going to do it for this episode. I want to thank Michael Whitlow for being on the show. I want to thank you guys for listening. And I want to make an announcement. If anybody out there, I'm sort of attempting to look for a co-host. If anybody out there knows somebody that would like to co-host, we record Sunday afternoons / Sunday nights. If you are interested, again, let us know. Twitter at Swerski Sports, SwerskiSports.com, Facebook.com/SwerskiSports. Let me know. We can talk and we'll go from there. But thank you guys so much for listening. Make sure you share this show with your friends. Hit subscribe. And until next time, bear down.
Cubs win! What a lucky break! The good Lord wants the Cubs to win!
We thank Ditka and God for all they have provided.
Cubs win! Cubs win! Cubs win!
Oh, I don't want her. You can have her. She's a Packer fan.
She can't fit in my van.
And she looks like number New Yorkers. Smoking crack is not legal on planes.
Bears 31 to -7.
The Bears.
Oh, when the Bears go berry.